This week's episode of the Run, Eat, Drink podcast is brought to you by listeners like you. Head on over to patreon.com/Run, Eat, Drink podcast and subscribe today. Fans, founders, and insiders like you help us keep the Run, Eat, Drink podcast going. And we thank you for your support.
Hello, this is Ambi Burfoot, and you're listening to the Run, Eat, Drink podcast.
Welcome to the Run, Eat, Drink podcast. We feature destination races from across the country. And after the race, we take you on a tour of the best local food and beverage to celebrate. So whether you are an elite runner or a back of the packer like us, you'll know the best places to accomplish, explore, and indulge on your next runcation. Hey, welcome to episode 208 of the Run, Eat, Drink podcast. I'm your host, Amy.
And I'm your co-host, Dana.
I'm very excited about this episode and the fact that it's coming out early this week. And of course, you must know why, Dana.
Well, it is a special week in running.
Yes.
One of the most storied, most anticipated, most trained for, sought after indeed, bucket list races for many runners is happening, I believe, today as this episode drops.
As this episode is published, it's Marathon Monday. It's Patriots Day. It's the 126th running of the Boston Marathon, I believe.
It's kind of a big deal.
Huge. It's also a big anniversary of the Boston Marathon in that it is the 50th anniversary, if I'm doing the math right, the 50th anniversary of the running of the Boston Marathon, in which women were allowed to register and be a part of it and have official race numbers for the very first time.
That's amazing.
1972, is that right?
I believe you are correct.
Yeah.
So that seems like a lot. That had to have been so long ago, but it really wasn't that long ago.
50 years.
It just seems like something that would be relegated to history books, but it's not.
Well, it is in history books.
But I mean, it's
running.
not just in history books.
No.
I mean, this is within recent memory of many runners out there still. And
we've had a women's running icon on our show right at this time, just about this time last year, Catherine Switzer.
Yeah.
It was a fantastic interview, a fantastic conversation she gave us all about the year she ran unofficially.
Yeah, let's call it that, unofficially.
And then officially.
Yes.
She talked about a lot of things, but it was great to have her on the show and hear about it firsthand. It's not relegated to history books. We have running icons among us who will talk about that. That's not the only thing that is connected to the history of the Boston Marathon.
No, I mean, there's so much history. And when you think about races that mold the sport and people who've molded the sport, I think that those are two sets that invariably intersect. And that point of intersection, almost 100%, happens in Boston.
You think about people like Catherine Switzer. You think about her predecessor, Bobby Gibb. You think about Nina Cusick. Joan Benoit Samuelson. You think about our coach and America's coach, Jeff Galloway, and him returning to Boston after the year after the Boston Marathon bombings. You think about the Boston documentary from 2017.
What do you think about Meb running it the year after the bombing?
Oh, so many historic, inspirational, emotional moments for our country.
And this year is probably going to be a historic year for the Boston as well.
It's the 50th anniversary of women in this race. It has so much meaning, and so many of them are there to share their stories. There's somebody that we happened to talk to a few weeks ago that knows a lot about that wrote a book about that came of age in the running world just as all of that was happening.
Yeah.
And his name is Ambi Burfoot.
You may have noticed that we had a new intro to the show when the show opened. And that's because
somebody new introducing our show. Yay.
Ambi gave us a little bit of his time and was so gracious and just wonderful to talk to and get his historical perspective on Boston and on a lot of other things. We had a very long conversation with him, and I'm so excited that we're going to be sharing a portion of that today on this episode.
And this is a very Boston focused portion of our conversation.
There's a theme developing here, folks, if you haven't picked up on it.
Yes. So typically we will talk about running, eating, and drinking. This is all about Boston, Boston, and more Boston.
And more Boston.
And more Boston. Yes. So we're kicking off the show with some shout outs. We'll get into the interview with Ambi, which will be the show this week.
Absolutely. But, when I was saying that this year was going to have some additional history at the Boston, I mean, yeah, okay, it's a great and storied race. Yeah, fine. It's a bucket list race for people. Okay, whatever. Some of the greatest runners on the planet have run it. But you know what? Historically speaking, this is probably the first year we've had this many members of the Runcation Nation at Boston.
That is true.
So let's get to the shout outs and shout them out.
That is a great idea. This week, we are doing a special round of shout outs. There may be many of you running different races this weekend or that you have completed over this last weekend prior to Marathon Monday, Patriots Day. These are all Boston themed shout outs, and they're very special, very near and dear to our hearts. They go to Meg, Main Street Miles Meg, Amanda Napolitano, Dr. Andy Sharp, and Babs of Babs019 on Instagram. She is a part of the Donna Marathon weekend, very instrumental there, as is Amanda, as is Andi. All of them are important members of the Runcation Nation. And they'll all be at Boston.
They will.
On Monday.
Yeah. Amanda and Andy are running it.
Yes.
Babs is volunteering at the finish line and giving out medals.
Which I mean, volunteering at the finish line. And I mean, what an amazing way to be a part of the Boston Marathon.
It's kind of like having seats at the 1 yard line at a football game, at the Super Bowl.
At your favorite teams, and your favorite team is playing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. It's so wonderful that will happen, that Amanda and Andy will be running, that
but wait,
Meg.
I was going to say,
there's more. That Meg and her mother will be at mile 15 of the Boston Marathon. They'll be on the right, and they will, of course, be cheering on runners.
Yes.
And
as one does.
They will be having little kits of fuel, hydration, and other items to help runners keep going as they pass over that halfway mark and get into the last half of their Boston experience and start that ascent and climb.
Heartbreak Hill.
As they head toward Heartbreak Hill, yes.
Yeah.
And as they start to head toward that famous last turn, that 1 mile to go sign, that amazing back half of the course at Boston. So thank you, ladies. Thank you, Meg and Meg's mom, for being our cheer squad. I hope you get to see Andi. I hope you get to see Amanda. Have a blast as a cheer squad on Marathon Monday. Amanda, Andi, we love you. Have a great race. It's an unbelievable experience, and we're so happy that you are there and you get to be a part of it.
Absolutely. I'm jealous. I'm having some FOMO.
And Babs, oh my gosh.
I know.
She's got, like you said, she's got the best seat ever, except for she's going to be on her feet for quite a while.
This is true.
You know what I mean?
We also want to shout out our friend of the show,
Yes!
Marko Cheseto, who will be running the Boston Marathon on Monday as well.
Oh.
And I believe I caught a little bit of his presser that he did.
I just caught a picture. I wasn't able to watch it yet.
And, it's just, again, his energy and his enthusiasm, I think, always comes through in an interview. And he talks about, how many total miles it takes in training to get ready to run those 26. And it's a lot of miles.
It's when nobody is looking, it's setting the alarm. It's getting up early. It's putting in those miles in the dark or late at night or midday as you train for whatever conditions you may encounter. It is fueling yourself and eating right and hydrating and doing all of those things and having such discipline to get to that start line healthy and in that mindset that Marko always talked about on our show when he talked about it when he was first on our show, and then also when we had him back at the Anchorage Run Fest talking about this past August, just talking about his mindset, his positivity, his dedication to doing what he needs to do to get to that start line and execute. And we can't wait to see that on Monday.
Absolutely. So listen, if you or anyone you know needs a shout out on the show, don't forget to send them to us. We do our best to collect shout outs throughout the week. Send them our way. Send them to info@runeatdrink.net. That's email at info@runeatdrink.net, or
call and leave a message at 941-677-2733. That's 941-677-2733.
Yeah, no, you can leave that voicemail like that. If you email us, you can email us text and we can read it. Even better, though, we would love it if you would just record a little audio file and send it to us. You can do that right on your phone, make it really easy. But if you just want to go old school, call 941-677-2733. So we have a main event to get to here.
Let's do it.
We have been eagerly awaiting this. This one's been in the can for a while.
So excited.
We've had to contain ourselves, not wanting to give it away because we've had this recorded for a while.
Yeah.
We've talked in lives. We've alluded to it, but we haven't given it up. Today's the day. Ambi Burfoot,
1968 Boston Marathon champion.
He's kind of a big deal.
He sat down to talk with us on this episode about his win at Boston, the role of women in running Boston, combating weather conditions at Boston, being a part of the Boston documentary, returning to Boston the year after the bombing, the year that Meb won. He has such inspiration, such words of wisdom. He is a scholar of the sport.
It continues to be so to this day.
And we are just so happy to bring to you now our conversation with 1968 Boston Marathon champion, Ambi Burfoot.
On this episode, we are honored to welcome Ambi Burfoot to the show.
He's the winner of the 1968 Boston Marathon. Ambi is also an icon in the running world, Dana, because of his many years as executive editor of Runner's World since 1985. And he's also appeared in a documentary that I have watched repeatedly and may know by heart.
Maybe.
Which is Boston from 2017.
I've also seen it once or twice. And
yes.
You're also going to find Ambi sharing research and inspirational stories nowadays in Runner's World on Podium Runner and the Washington Post, and books like The Runner's Guide to the Meaning of Life, Runspirations, and First Ladies of Running, 22 inspiring profiles of the rebels, rule breakers, and visionaries who changed the sport forever.
Ambi, welcome to our show, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. It's a great delight. And the very first thing I want to say about the First Ladies, the revolutionaries and visionaries, at this year at the Boston Marathon, which is just a month away, will be the 50th anniversary of the first year that women were officially recognized at Boston. Of course, they were out there running before that, but the BAA didn't have the good sense to recognize them in the earlier years. This is the 50th anniversary this year, 1972 to 2022. And I believe the BAA Boston Marathon is going to do it upright.
That's fantastic to hear.
I'm going to be there. I'm going to be running. I'm going to be attending every single seminar or talk or appearance by the First Ladies and the 1972 Boston runners, because they're friends and contemporaries of mine. I had the good fortune to grow up in this sport at the same time as they were making their mark felt.
I'm going to move the clock to 1967 for a second. That's the year that Catherine Switzer entered as KB Switzer. Can you tell us what you remember about that?
Yeah, almost nothing. 1967. Really? Yeah, 1967. You know, it's a bigger event now than it was then, I think, except for the photo. The photo was very, very impactful, of course. But 1967, I have to think now. 1967 was the year that I had to make 2 pit stops in the middle of the Boston Marathon because of some extremely strange things that I ate the night before. Oh, no. I had runners in the race, the last 10 miles that I passed twice. They kept on saying to me, "What's your problem? Where are you coming from? Why do you keep passing us?" Because I went off the course, used restrooms at gas stations, and came back on the course. So I had a good day, and I finished 17th, and I would have been much closer to the front if I hadn't lost 5 minutes in gas stations. Aww. But you have to remember, Catherine and the women were several hours behind us guys who were running 2.5 hours. Yeah. So we didn't see them. We didn't know they were in the race. They weren't a big deal in Hopkinton because they were mostly hiding under their sweatshirts and things like that. So they wouldn't attract notoriety. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like we all knew that a Bobby Gibb or a Catherine Switzer was running the race. We were all running our own races as people do now. And the top guys were several hours in front of the top women, as I said. So we found out about Catherine's encounter with Jock Semple in the same way as everyone else, the same way as she did with those incredible newspaper photos the next day. And then I do want to go so far as to say that all of the runners back in those days, all of the male runners, whether they were elites, top notch, or in the middle of the pack, we were all looking for women to run the race. We had nothing against them. They didn't get in our way. They added to the environment and the wholesomeness and the fullness of the marathon. Of course, there should be women running. So we were all completely supportive. It was just the old AAU officials and the even older rules of the AAU and silly organizations like that got in the way of women competing. Even Jock Semple, he wasn't trying to beat the crap out of Catherine Switzer. He just wanted to grab the number off of her sweatshirt so that it wouldn't look like he was organizing a race with illegal runners in it, because women were illegal then. So there was no antipathy towards women. We all wanted to have more ladies join us. As I always say, I was a skinny, nerdy kid who couldn't get a date to save my life. So you bet I wanted women in the race. Maybe that would increase my chances. So we were always supportive, and the women do acknowledge that.
I just want to follow up on that for just a second. You made mention of you all found out about it the same way as everybody else did, which was in the newspapers the next day.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we forget the context of how information traveled. Even, it was completely different 20 years ago. We're now talking 1967. At that time, did you have any idea or any inkling that that moment might be something as big as it turned out to be?
No. And I say that in all honesty. And the reason is that we simply could not imagine that there was more than one Bobby Gibb and one Catherine Switzer and one Nina Cusick and one Sarah Berman in the entire universe. And by the time you added all of them together, you got to the grand total of 7 or 9 or however many women showed up at the starting line in 1972. So while we were completely and wholly supportive of women, there was not a soul, not them either, who could possibly have imagined where women's running was going to go. Let's see, what was it? It was at least 20 years later, if not 25 or 30 years later. And now we've come to 2022, and essentially the sport is half women, however you want to slice it. And absolutely a big and important part of the story, and absolutely essential to running's health and its future, to have women who, for better or worse, are the center of the American family and have to bear so much in family life, to have them encouraged and participating, and for the most part recognized, is a huge, huge advance. And running led the way. We got there. It wasn't easy. It wasn't pretty all the time, certainly not when Catherine Switzer was being harassed on the course. But we did get there ahead of just about all other sports. And I believe for the most part that we have a very proud history in running.
I think that experience and her subsequent experiences led her to become a journalist. And then you went on the next year to win at Boston and then become a journalist.
Winning Boston was an impossible dream, and yet it was something I was completely focused on as a New Englander and as a disciple of John J. Kelly, who had also won Boston. In fact, from 1957 until when he won until 68 when I won, every other race was won by a foreigner at Boston. So you had 11 years, and we were the only 2 Americans during that period. It was just what I wanted more than anything else in the world. 1968 was an Olympic year. Of course, I hope to go to the Olympics in Mexico City. Many of the top Americans actually skipped Boston that spring so that they could prepare fully for the Olympic trials later in the summer. But as I said, I'm a New Englander. I'm a Kelly disciple. Boston's in my backyard. I'm not going to skip anything. I'm going to go to the Boston Marathon and give it my all. And if I have a great day, good. If I don't have a great day, I pick up the pieces and see what's next. And I was very, very lucky.
You talk about that day feeling effortless, and it's when I watched the Boston documentary and I watched the part that you're in that talks about your victory. It's so great to hear from all of you your different specific experiences and how you were feeling and how you were training and what that moment of victory was like. How did you get involved in that Boston documentary?
Oh, that was easy. I had met the director-producer, John Dunham, in some of his earlier work at Chicago Marathon. I was a well-known Boston Marathon runner and by this time an older one who could reflect on some of the history of the race, which he was looking for, and the Kellys and the DeMars and things like that. Also connected with Bill Rogers, etc. So that all came about quite naturally. What I'd like to say about the Boston winners in that film, that wonderful film, that just absolutely incredible film, because it captured 2013 and 2014, the most crazy, horrible, and wonderful years Boston or any marathon will ever have. Speaking about the winners, we're all individuals and we're all different, and our lives, of course, have taken us in different directions. But we all feel very connected by our passion for marathoning, our belief that the Boston Marathon is the historic traditional race and the one that has to be run, even though there are many, many great, important marathons around the globe now. And the fact that we all recognize that whatever it takes to get across that Boston finish line first is a supreme effort. And it's not a one-day effort. It takes the effort of months and years and training hard consistently for a long, long time. And so we all support the endurance ethic, which is, it's not a one-day affair. It's a long time affair. And on April 15th or 17th or 19th or whatever day is the Boston Marathon, there's a little bit of limelight on us, which is nice. But guess what? There are 364 other days of the year when no one's paying a damn bit of attention to us. And we're still out there doing what you have to do if you want to have a big day at the Boston Marathon. And so we're united by that consistent purpose and drive to excellence.
Yeah.
And as a history nerd, that hearing you and everyone in that documentary talk about that really brings it to life and gives the context and makes it something that's not just old stories in a history book or a running book talking about the history of running. It's actually a lived experience and something that you've had an opportunity to share. And I love that you were willing to participate in that.
I'm going back to Boston, and I'm going back to 2013 and you being stopped a mile before the finish. That, and then turning around the next year in 2014 and running for the Martin Richard Foundation. That those two must have been very emotional races and must have run the gamut for you.
I think gamut is the right word. And again, there's so much in those two races. 2013 was 45 years after the year I won. I was running every 5 years at that point. So I'm the oldest returning winner in the field, and I'm sort of puffed up with myself, and I'm thinking I'm pretty cool. Nobody else is doing what I'm doing, and I'm running the Boston Marathon. I'm having a good time. I'm with a couple of friends who are pacing me, as it were. And suddenly the race just stops in front of me. I've never seen this. I've run a million road races and there's never been a road race that just stopped in front of me. And none of us had any idea what was going on. We were a mile from the finish, but there were plenty of buildings to block any sounds or anything else. We didn't have any clue what was going on. Of course, when you're a mile from the finish, you're finally like, hey, I'm going to make it. I can do this. And so when they stop you, you're not a happy camper.
No.
There were 5,000 of us and we were not happy. But they, at least about me, because I thought I was going to be the star finishing for the 45th year after my win. But they stopped us and they dispersed us and told us to get back however we could. And I walked back to my hotel with a couple of friends, and as we did, we saw ambulances and police cars, an endless stream of loud sirens and vehicles headed towards the finish. And not until I got to my hotel and saw it on TV did I really realize what had happened. And of course, when you do realize it, it just completely kicks you in the gut. One moment you're thinking about yourself, how can they steal the Boston Marathon finish away from me? The next moment you realize what happened to so many people at the finish line, and my sister was among them. She was across the street from the bombs and was not hurt, but she was in the stands waiting to see me finish, and my family was in a car following me along the course. So then we're just decimated, and it's just the most horrible thing that has ever happened in running. And for a day or two, we all think, oh my God, this could literally be the death of running, because who will ever run a marathon again, knowing that you're on public streets and there's really no way for security to protect you, and crazy people and terrorists and others can do real harm to you. And that went on for, I think, about 24 or 36 hours. And then all of us, I don't know how we had this instantaneous total mind meld where everyone simply decided, wait, no, that's not the way it's going to be. We're going to go back to Boston in 2014 and reclaim those streets and reclaim the history of the Boston Marathon and prove that this can be a celebratory race for thousands of people, for 40,000 or 50,000, which is how many wanted to run in 2014. And of course, the BAA couldn't let them all in, but we had about 36,000, which was about the same as the 100th in 1996. And it was the most bright, sunny day you could possibly imagine. And I could run for a million years and never run a race that was as positive and emotional as that one, on both sides of the road. The runners were all there. We were all saying to every spectator, thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting the Boston Marathon. Thank you for believing that we can continue to hold a fantastic race like this. And the spectators were saying to us, thank you for coming back to Boston. Thank you for maintaining the tradition of the Boston Marathon. Thank you for showing that you're not afraid and we're not afraid, and we're going to reclaim this great tradition and the public spaces of downtown Boston for runners and spectators alike. And I always said that the 100th Boston Marathon would be forever the greatest event in running history, but the 2014 Boston exceeded it by light years because of the tragedy of the year before and the celebration of let's get back and reclaim this thing, which was universal for everybody. And it was just exhilarating to run that day. Those of us who ran the 2014 Boston Marathon we'll count ourselves lucky for the rest of our lives that we were able to participate on that day.
I loved how you said, I don't think that I'm going to run across that finish line. I think I'm going to walk across that finish line, because it's about the experience. And that was so amazing to see that and hear that in that documentary.
That was something I've done in my Boston since starting in 2014, is to just stop with 100 yards or so to go, I guess, at the site of the first bomb, and just look upward. And I'm not a religious person, but nonetheless, there are forces in life that none of us understand. To look up and say thank you, to look to the crowd and say thank you, to turn around and applaud the runners who are coming towards me in the finish line, to say, way to go, everyone. You really deserve this. And then just to walk across the finish line, because a couple of seconds is not what it's about at this point in my life, but realizing how lucky I am to be out there still and still able to do these things.
Now, you're a man who's run all over the world, and I know we are talking so much about Boston. I have one final Boston question. It's just an iconic race. It's a bucket list race, and you're just so tied to it. Your return in 2018 for the anniversary of your victory. You and everybody at that race had challenges that day. The weather was awful, and we've had some experience in bad weather, but nothing like that.
No.
Can you talk a little bit about that as a professional runner and a seasoned, experienced runner? Talk about that experience and how it impacted you, or how it might have changed your training or going forward from that.
I'm chuckling, and the reason I'm chuckling is because it was an example of the curveballs that life throws you. And I had known for a long, long time that 2018 was going to be the 50th anniversary of my win at Boston. And it was a big deal to me. And again, I imagined a day of sunshine and waving to people and people waving to me. And I was going to finish 2 hours behind the winners, but so what? I was still going to accomplish something on that day. And then the weather was horrendous beyond any imagining. And if you weren't there, you can't quite imagine how bad it was. I had 5 or 6 people who were going to run with me that day, thank goodness. I gathered them at the starting line. I said, okay, huddle up. This is not a race anymore. I had a goal time, nothing special, but I had a goal time beforehand. I said, goal time's out. It's not about time. It's about hanging together, supporting each other, and getting all 6 of us through this horrendous thing. And it was tough. And my brother, who was one of our team, got very hypothermic in the middle of the race and was just about to drop out when one of the other team members saw a discarded jacket. I guess it was a plastic bag jacket at the side of the road, went over, grabbed that, wrapped it around my brother, and it did just enough to bring him back to life so that he could carry on. And we had 6 or 7 in our team, and we did honestly hang together the whole way, support each other, encourage each other, tell each other it didn't matter what that mile time was, forget the splits, just keep going, keep going, keep going. And all of us finished, and all of us finished together, and all of us finished together in a time that didn't make any difference, but as a group. And it was a group that was important. I'm pretty sure none of us, including myself, could have made it alone that day. It was the kind of day where you really needed some help if you were going to be out there for 5 hours, and we were out there very close to 5 hours.
I love
brutal.
Yeah. And I love that a runner of your caliber has a moment like that and can talk about it with such clarity. So that's clearly a race that stands out in your mind. I think that's an important thing for our listeners to hear, with our audience being mostly back of the pack runners and having some very tough races a lot of the time. It's great to know that even the elites, the elite of the elites can have those kind of races too.
Yeah. Like at Donna, at the Donna Marathon weekend, we just had rain.
Part of our team did the full marathon, and they had 30-mile-an-hour sustained winds, gusts over 40, and 50 degrees and raining the entire time, or almost 50 degrees.
Yeah. And we thought, it's interesting what you said about, we huddled together and we're just going to get to the finish line and we're going to work together to do it, because that is what we did. Mm-hmm. That is exactly what we did. And we picked up people along the way in the first couple of miles that actually stayed with us to the end of the half marathon. Now, we haven't done a full marathon yet.
I've run, I don't know if the Donna still runs on the beach at Jacksonville Beach. I've run quite a bit on the beach at Jacksonville, and 7, 8, 10, time goes by quickly. Years ago, when I was in Jacksonville Beach for a month or so, I trained on several long runs with the crew that was doing long runs to get ready for the Donna. I should go down there and do the full thing some year.
Oh, we would love
But not
that.
with wind and rain.
Yeah. You have inspired us with your running, and your stories. You have also written articles and books, and your book, Runspirations, which is on the set back here behind me now. It is one that I come to again and again for just the quotes that are in there, the advice that's in there. As the title says, amazing stories, timeless wisdom, and motivational quotes.
Well, Ambi, you spent the better part of the last hour talking about a lot of history with us, and we love that. But what I'd like to let our listeners in on is, what's next for Ambi Burfoot? What are you going to be doing, and where are people going to be able to find out more about what you're doing?
I'm going to run Boston in April. I'm coming in very undertrained. It seems strange to run it again so soon after last October. But I've almost gotten to the point where I'm like, geez, who knows how many more years I can run Boston. I may as well do it as long as I'm able to. And somehow I'll eat the crow of running a really slow time, but that's okay. And run some local races this summer. I don't race a lot. And of course, the big race on my annual calendar is my Thanksgiving Day race, which I've run, 58 years in a row, I think it is.
Wow.
And that's a record that I'd like to keep going for a few more years. And mainly, I like my daily, I don't run every day, I run every other day now, but I like my every other day running habit. I like running and walking with friends. I like going to the gym with some friends. I very, very much enjoy training partners and the social aspects of running, which there haven't been enough of in the last 2 years. So I hope things continue in a good direction going forward. And writing, at this point, I'm spending most of my effort on a weekly newsletter called Run Long, Run Healthy that Podium Runner puts out. And that might move to another platform, but that allows me to dig into the latest scientific research and the latest and best articles, which are appearing around the world on the internet, and put a dozen or so of those in front of readers every month. And I'm pretty much happy doing what I've been doing for a long time. People say, aren't you bored, or shouldn't you start playing piano or something? And I'm like, yeah, I like doing what I'm doing. I think I'll just keep it up.
I think you should.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And we're going to have
agree.
links to everything in the show notes and on our website for people to be able to find more Ambi Burfoot. We want to thank you for spending so much time with us tonight and being so generous with your time and your stories and your words of inspiration. This has been an absolute honor for us to be able to sit down and talk with you tonight.
Thank you for the invite, and thank you for what you're doing to encourage others to get healthy and enjoy running. And a little eating and drinking, apparently.
Absolutely.
I love it. Only a little.
The history nerd inside of me is so grateful that this podcast has given us a chance to talk to somebody like Ambi.
Yes. It was wonderful to speak with him. So inspirational to hear all of his wisdom. And there's more. And patrons of our show, patrons in the Runcation Nation, can go to patreon.com/runeatdrinkpodcast and hear more.
Yes.
Or if you are part of the patron program in the Podbean application, you will have access to it as well.
That's going to do it for this week's show. But Runcation Nation, don't forget about the Mother's Day 5K and Your Way on Mother's Day weekend. Both virtual and in-person events are available, and we have a special discount code for you. You can learn more about the race weekend by going to runeatdrink.net/Donna.
You can be a part of it virtually or in person in Jacksonville with us on Mother's Day weekend.
And if you're going to, message us and let us know. We'd love to meet up.
Oh, yes. And there's a discount code exclusively for you. Use RUNEATDRINK, all one word, RUNEATDRINK, for 5% off an entry, either physical or virtual option. That wraps up another great episode, and we will talk to you more running, more eating, more drinking next week.
Thank you so much for listening.
For joining us on your long run, your commute to work, around the house, wherever you are. I'm your host, Amy.
And I'm your co-host, Dana.
Stay safe and well, and we will accomplish, explore, and indulge with you really soon. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Run, Eat, Drink podcast. We're having another great year thanks to your support. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We're at Run, Eat, Drink Podcast. And on Twitter, we're Run, Eat, Drink Pod. You can also give us a call at 941-677-2733 or send us an email at info@runeatdrink.net. Visit our website at runeatdrink.net and click on the subscribe link so you don't miss a minute. Find out how you can support the show at patreon.com/runeatdrinkpodcast. Accomplish, explore, and indulge right along with us. We'll talk to you next time.